Welcome everyone. How you doing? Jefferson Glassie here. I have another book review that I'm going to do of this book here, The Silent Pulse by George Leonard. A search for the perfect rhythm that exists in each of us. This book was recommended to me by John Tinger, I believe. Thank you, John. It was originally published in 1978. This was republished, an updated version in 2006, and George Leonard is no longer with us, but this is a really profound book, and I've shared it with a couple people, and I'm looking forward to their comments as well. It's very kind of complex, and if I was really smart, I could just tell you what it's about, but I'm going to read from it, go through it, give you some basically read quotes from it with a little bit of ad lib, a little bit of commentary by me. So hang in there. It's not that long of a book, but I will try to summarize it as best as I can. So in the preface, The Way of Rhythm and Harmony, George says is that music basically encoded the basic structure of the universe. And at the heart of each of us, whatever our imperfections, there exists a silent pulse of perfect rhythm made up of waveforms and resonances, which is absolutely individual and unique, and yet which connects us to everything in the universe. The act of getting in touch with this pulse can transform our personal experience and in some ways alter the world around us. He says, for once you start seeing the material world in terms of rhythmic waves, your ideas about what is real and true will probably seem much less certain, and in place of that certainty, I hope you will entertain a new sense of the richness and endless possibilities of existence. The first chapter is called Vibrato. I'm not going to call out each of the chapters, but just to mention, and I tend to highlight a lot of these things and put tabs on them so I can figure out where to go next. He says, nowhere on this planet can you find a people without music and dance. And that is certainly true. And the truth of the matter is the human animal was born a singer and a dancer. Pythagoras told his followers 2,500 years ago that stone is frozen music. And every particle in the physical universe takes its characteristics from the pitch and pattern and overtones of its particular frequencies, its singing. Before we make music, music makes us. When we hear an orchestra, we think of the drum and other percussion instruments as providing the rhythm. Actually, every sound that comes from every instrument is rhythm. We can make out the separate beats of a drum, but should those beats become faster and faster, eventually that would blur into what would perceive as a musical tone. And I'm familiar with that concept from Victor Wooten's camp, where Stephen Jay and his sons came and talked about that specifically. Moving right along. He says the deep structure of music is the same as the deep structure of everything else. And the best anyone can hope for is to remind you of what you already know. So he suggests this is a journey of remembrance rather than discovery. Next chapter is the rhythms of relationship. And he starts off with the fact, as my friend Bill Barclay told me, in 1665, the Dutch scientist Christian Huygens was noticing the two clocks he put together. They were working on clocks for ships, and they started beating at the same time. And they call that mutual phase locking of two oscillators entrainment. This phenomenon, it turns out, is universal. Whenever two or more oscillators in the same field are pulsing at nearly the same time, they tend to lock in so that they are pulsing at exactly the same time. The reason, simply stated, is that nature seeks the most efficient energy state, and it takes less energy to pulse in cooperation than in opposition. Living things contain oscillators. As a matter of fact, we might say they are oscillators. And our physical and mental states change in rhythm with the seasonal swing of the earth and the sun and the tides, with the day-night cycle. That's my bird clock. With the day-night cycle, and perhaps even with resonating, and perhaps even with the cosmic rhythms that present-day science hasn't yet isolated and defined. When these rhythms are forced out of phase, disease is likely and dis-ease is inevitable. Now, this is Professor Condon, William Condon, he quotes here some. He takes moving pictures of, say, a conversation between two people and displays the film on a time analyzer. And as it turns out, the micro movements of the speaker's body are precisely synchronized with the micro units of his speech. In other words, we're sort of rhythmically, when we're speaking, we're also rhythmically moving. All the movements, short and long, follow the same beat, linking syllables, words, and phrases to the dance of the body in precise rhythm. Rhythm, or time, must be seen, Condon explains, as a fundamental aspect of the organization of behavior and not as something added to it. Then he discovered that there's an entrainment between the speaker's words and movements and the listeners. Listeners were observed to move in precise shared synchrony with the speaker's speech. And this appears to be a form of entrainment as well. Communication is thus like a dance, with everyone engaged in intricate and shared movements across many subtle dimensions, yet all strangely oblivious that they're doing so. But if the listener moves, his movements will tend to be synchronous with the articulatory structure of the speaker's speech. The most fundamental level, then, the listener is not reacting or responding to the speaker. The listener is, in a sense, part of and one with the speaker. Going back to, say, the day of birth of a person, Condon's film studies show that the normal newborn infant, like a normal adult, moves synchronously with the pattern of the mother's voice. That literal content is only a part, probably a minor part of human communication, but the infant is born already connected with the fundamental rhythms that hold us all together. Infants are born with the order of the world already in them. He also filmed and analyzed the responses of a number of children ranging in ages from 8 days to 12 years, most of whom were classified as autistic-like or reading problems and slow learner, and made another discovery. These children's micro-movements entrained with speech in the normal way while it was going on, but then there was an echo. After an interval up to a second, their bodies moved again, as if in delayed response to the earlier sound. So he says, one of the most marked features of the response to delayed sound is the seeming lack of control of these children over their own bodies. Most of them tend to move more at a delayed time than when the actual sound occurs. And our ability to sort of seem normal depends on our ability to entrain with it. The newborn baby's ability to entrain with his or her mother's speech provides a mechanism that helps explain the bonding process that more and more psychologists are seeing as crucial to normal development. It also helps us understand the value of natural childbirth in pleasant, quiet surroundings and realize why isolated nurseries of crying babies are such terrible places. Now, then he moves on to commenting about how a new rhythm produces a new language. And he's looked into Dr. Stetson's comments and says a culture may be said to have a language, but a culture is a rhythm. A culture is a rhythm. This point impresses itself on us here in America, where two cultures, black and white, with the same ostensible language, have had serious problems communicating. Beginning to realize that black English, rich, specific, highly expressive, is actually different from white English. But grammar, syntax, and vocabulary can be mastered. The deeper problem is the rhythmic differences. A cultural theorist, Edward Hall, using Condon's methods, says there are great differences between working class blacks and a wide range of whites in such nonverbal behaviors as kinesics, body movements, prosemics, use of personal space, and rhythm in general. He argues that the nonverbal modes of communication are interwoven with the fabric of the personality and into society itself, even rooted in how one experiences oneself as a man or woman. I mean, this is tricky business, he admits, but every ethnic group has got rhythm, but the rhythms are different from one another. And members of majority ethnic groups have often acted as if anything different has got to be inferior. And this kind of explains a lot. Another doctor, a black psychiatrist named Dr. Price Cobbs, got a group of people together, and they had a session that went for 24 hours, and for hours and hours there was just all kinds of sort of disagreement, resentment, fear, hurt, rage, blah, blah, blah. But after quite some time, resentment turned to understanding. Tears of anger would become tears of sympathy and understanding, and barriers were shattering. And what he says, these were interracial marathons that were like crash courses in rhythmic entrainment. Remind me of my friend Shauna Oshiro's course that puts together barbershop harmony singing with discussions about race. He says it's as if words didn't have their usual force and effect, as if all of us on both sides of the racial barrier were fighting our way through heavy mud. Perhaps the long hours of talk, the sleeplessness, the catharsis were needed for us to get our conversational rhythms together, to begin the process of entrainment that is the essence of human communication. So Dr. Condon then says, the more you move in rhythm with someone, the closer you become with that person. This is true not only with human beings, but also with all living creatures. And Condon suspects that entrainment is involved in the movements and sounds that precede mating in most animals and insects. In music, George Leonard says, the miracle of entrainment is made explicit. The performer's every gesture, every micro movement must be perfectly entrained with the pulse of the music, or else the performance falls apart. And that's kind of an interesting concept. Leonard says, there's no way we can escape it. Rhythmic entrainment, like all powerful processes, can be used for good or ill, to gain power, to withhold it from others. Rhythm can be captured or confused or broken, but only for so long. Ultimately, entrainment stands beyond manipulation, for it is the stuff of life itself, echoing the essential connectedness that defines existence. Different cultures speak and move in different specific rhythms, but the process of rhythmic connectedness is the same for all cultures. People also fail to realize that the function of small talk is entraining. And entrainment, however accomplished, is the basis of all verbal interaction. More than that, is our most accessible entry into the dance of the universe, and as T.S. Eliot reminds us, there is only the dance. Moving on to the next chapter, Flesh, Spirit, and Emptiness, he talks about, just a very short comment on this, what is the body made of? He says it is made of emptiness and rhythm. This is sort of following the principles of modern quantum physics. At the ultimate heart of the body, at the heart of the world, there is no solidity. Once again, there is only the dance. The next chapter talks about what the senses say. And he's talking about electrons and protons, etc. And he gets to the point. The point of the chapter will be to show how we are connected through our senses to basically everything. We are intimately connected, as we've seen earlier, with the world of sound vibrations. We are also joined through our senses with an amazingly wide range of rhythmic pulsations other than sound. In this regard, we can think of our senses as rhythmic transformers, pure and simple, all of our senses. And he reflects on the fact that it was Aristotle, apparently, who came up with the idea of 5 senses, hearing, vision, smell, taste, and touch, thus misleading people for some 2,500 years. Researchers at various times have identified, for example, nearly 30 additional sense qualities associated with touch alone: pressure, contact, deep pressure, prick pain, deep cold, heat, muscular pressure, etc., etc. To simplify those qualities into basic touch systems, we can say the skin houses at least 4 separate senses. So he looks at different senses, smell, taste, etc., and concludes, says, everything is rhythm and electricity, which is what kind of moves these vibrations. And I think Eileen McCusick might agree with that. So now, he says, just as sensing can influence thought, thought can also influence sensing. He said it's clear that members of surviving primitive hunting and gathering bands possess sensing abilities foreign to most of us, abilities to sense underground water in desert areas, to find direction and locate position on cloudy days, and in some cases to view game animals that are out of range of the conventional senses. You know, this is the reason Victor Wooten at his Spirit of Music camp has had animal communicators participate, because of this kind of ultimate connection of vibration amongst us through our senses. He says the human body, like the bodies of all living things, creates its own electromagnetic field. The nervous system is a network of unceasing electrical activity. The brain, an increasingly complex switchboard on which every light is twinkling day and night. The electrical activity within the brain is organized into pulsing waves which can be measured on the surface of the scalp and which can propagate out into space at the speed of light. Similarly, the heart and its extended system of blood vessels produces electrical current, and the electromagnetic field associated with the cardiovascular system has been detected by sensitive instruments several feet away from the body. So each of us then is a radio transmitter. The question remains, can we also operate as radio receivers? And the conventional answer has been no, but he says, the senses rarely, if ever, operate as separate and discrete systems. Sounds of low pitch are heard not so much through the ears as through the skin, like elephants hear with their feet. He says our health and well-being are influenced to some extent by our connection to the rhythms of the tides, the seasons, the turning of the earth, and we are indeed in relationship with all that there is. He says 19th century Western man envisioned himself as an isolated individual eternally at war with nature. But he says that age has passed. How arrogant it was to think that we could stand alone and apart against the world. Now we are beginning to see that senses, all of them and their interplay, are not mere sentinels, but means of connection. Now he gets into another concept in the next chapter called personal identity in the inner pulse. He says personal identity is an essential quality of human existence, and its operations are expressed in a rhythmic inner pulse. To be human, it seems clear, is to have a personal identity, as Victor might say, a fingerprint. This identity is unique and irreversible. It provides our particular viewpoint on the universe. It expresses itself in numerous ways: body, mind, spirit, memory, and it survives death. And here he makes some interesting points. He talks about how he was reading a book by Thomas Wolfe, Look Homeward, Angel, and after reading it for a while, this is a while back, he realized that he met Thomas Wolfe and knew him in person through reading about him. And when the record needle drops on the turntable of, say, some Beethoven music, once again, he says, the miracle happens. The flaws are forgotten. Ludwig von Beethoven is here in the room. He's addressing himself to me alone. I know him. Across more than 200 years, transmitted by lines and dots on paper, put into sound by four men playing wooden instruments in Boston, translated into electronic impulses and then mechanical vibrations of a stylus on a disc. By Beethoven's personal presence survives. The music he's listening to is him. Something of Wolfe, his actual presence, was contained not so much in the content of his writing as in the cadence, the spaces between the words, if you will. Beethoven's presence was encoded and realized through an entirely different process, again, a rhythmic one. He says each of the 7 basic states of feeling, anger, hate, grief, love, sex, joy, and reverence, has its own characteristic gestures as well. And in music, this form reaches its highest expression. Music is an ideal medium for the expression of feelings. Music cannot be expressed in words, not because it is vague, but because it is more precise than words. We can say that Thomas Wolfe expressed his inner pulse through the rhythm and power of his pen, and the living presence can be sensed in a dog-eared book, just as Beethoven's can in a worn-out record. This all suggests that each of us has our own inner pulse, an essential aspect of our being that finds expression whenever we walk, speak, sing, write, shake someone's hands, play golf, make love. Each part, each aspect, in some way expresses the whole of us. Thus, this inner pulse has a special significance. When we look at a human individual as a series of rhythmic patterns of wave functions summed up as a single wave function or inner pulse, the dualism of mind-body dissolves. The body can be seen as one manifestation of the inner pulse with its various rhythms, even to the frozen rhythms of fingerprints growing out of a distinctive wave function. Mind as memory is seen as another manifestation. The inner pulse that is stable and persistent at the most fundamental level, the unitary identity that explodes out into the world, is a multiplicity of identifying characteristics. If mind as memory is one manifestation of the inner pulse, so is mind as intellect. And the span of the whole life, if only we had ways beyond intuition of charting it, would be seen to have a distinctive rhythmic pattern, a pattern that would by no means be erased upon the death of the physical body, but would persist in the everlasting web of rhythmic relationships that constitute a meaningful universe. It's sort of like our individual rhythm, our identity, our rhythm, our vibrational fingerprint is a part of all the rhythm of everything. So we can look at this personal identity as unique, irreducible, and irreversible, one of the essential qualities of being. But there's another quality that binds identity in a paradoxical relationship containing almost infinite power. This quality, he calls it holonomy, Holonomy, is even more strange than identity. This is about the web of existence, and he gets to chapter 6 and talks about, he says, thus far in this book I presented a variation on the theme, choosing to view the world mostly in terms of rhythmic fields, with music and dance as perhaps the most appropriate metaphors. He's introduced the idea of individual human identity that can be expressed through a distinctive inner pulse. He suggests that the body, bones, flesh, and all is ultimately emptiness and rhythm. And the senses are means of connecting these organized rhythmic fields that we call the self with all the rhythms of the world, and transforming the material into the picture or projection that we call reality. What he wants to explore now is our connectedness to the world that is built into our very structure. This is very interesting because this is, he's talking basically about our part in a holographic universe. He notes over here on this page, nothing in the fundamental laws of physics forbids the transformation of information from the future to the present. Many physicists are now coming around to the point of view that there must always be significant connection between the observer and the observed. Yes, we know that from quantum physics. between consciousness and the environment, another way to put it. It's quite clear that observation affects the micro world of electrons, protons, and so on. To observe precisely the position or momentum of an electron is to change its position or momentum. A Princeton physicist, John Wheeler, said, "I think that through our own act of consciously choosing and posing questions about the universe, we bring about in some measure what we see taking place before us." It's a very expansive view of the observer and the observed, the observer sort of creating the observed, but it's mutual. Not only does quantum theory suggest a connection between consciousness and the environment, but also between every particle in the universe. Bell's theorem. The mind and matter can and do influence each other, and that everything that happens everywhere is somehow connected. He calls this holography, in the nature sort of a hologram. When a hologram is cut in half, the entire picture is contained in both halves. Each part of the hologram, no matter how small then, if you cut it down smaller and smaller, it can reproduce the whole image in total. That the whole of a thing is contained in each of its parts is by no means a new idea. We've seen the essence of a whole person is expressed in certain of his or her parts: fingerprint, voice print, pattern of respiration, inner rhythmic pulse, face ID. In addition, the DNA in the nucleus of every cell contains the blueprint for the whole body. But the idea of all-in-oneness that can be drawn from the hologram goes beyond that. It's closer to the Hindu idea of the net of jewels, in which every jewel, every piece of the universe contains every other piece. It is indeed the mystic tradition of every great religious tradition that every part of the universe, in some sense, contains the whole. Even though our common sense kind of has difficulty with this, the idea is that each of the diverse fragments of the natural world, a grain of sand, a seed, a leaf, a stone, a person, actually contains the entire universe. Yet this is perhaps the most compelling knowledge gained by those who achieve the higher states of contemplation. In the hologram, we see science once again imitating mysticism, presenting us with a modern device that helps explain an ancient truth. And theoretically, some sort of super holograph could be made at any spot in the universe, containing information about the whole universe from that vantage point. And the human brain is the most complex entity we have discovered yet anywhere, and it now appears the brain itself may operate in a holographic pattern. How are memories stored? Where does perception take place? Through accident or surgery, a person loses most or all of any of these parts. Lo and behold, the memory or ability thought to be entirely localized in that part is still present in the person's mind. May be fuzzier, resolution may be lost, but the function is there in full. He says, if you could look at the world of matter as a probability wave hologram, then you could dispense entirely with the idea of tiny supercomputers. A probability wave is a mathematical formula that exists in dimensional space, that is, space with as many dimensions as you please. This space, we might say, is similar to that in which the mind operates. According to quantum theory, every particle can be described as a wave function having 3 dimensions of space and 3 of momentum, a total of 6 dimensions in this n-dimensional space. In this way of conceptualizing, every particle is connected and the whole universe can be described from the point of view of a single particle. And then he says it may be a large jump, but it's not impossible to conceive the events of the universe as being actually made up of interference patterns of probability waves. In such a universe, information about the whole of it is available at every point. Then he says, to take it back home, you can look at your own body and say that each subatomic particle within you is in touch with all that is. So all of the possible knowledge in its general outlines, if not in its sharply focused particulars, is potentially available to you. Not just knowledge of the present, but of the past and at least some of the future as well. We are not in, but of the web of relationship. Each of us is an individual identity, and that identity can be most easily expressed as a wave function, a unique rhythmic pulse. Simultaneously, paradoxically, each of us is a holoid of the universe, and that holoid is also expressed in terms of wave functions. Thus, we are both individual and universal, and the web of relationship involves both aspects of our being. Though all of the information of the universe is ultimately available in each of us, the amount of it we can encode and express, it's a tiny amount, indeed, is limited by particular history, culture, language, and nervous system. For now, it's enough to say that we are completely, firmly, absolutely connected to all of existence, and the next evolutionary step will involve, at the least, our realizing that connection. So the next chapter, and whether you're following along or not, the number of chapters doesn't matter too much. He calls it the playground of reality. And he says, my proposition here is a simple one. He's talking about opposites. If there were no identity, that is, if all the universe were merely the one, reflected infinitely in every part of the one, there would be no real differences, and thus no relationships would be possible. And without relationship, there could be no object or event, no physical universe, no mental universe, no spiritual universe, no thing. At the least, we can say not that that the relationships create things or the things create relationships, but that the two are mutually dependent, complementary. This is kind of like the yin-yang theater that Victor also talks about. You know, in order to be good, there has to be bad. And he says the personal identity in the form of a distinctive pulse can persist over time in the works of great classical composers, and the same thing is true in all truly creative personal works. Moving along, we go to, this is still the same chapter, I believe. Realizing that I am the center of the universe makes it easy for me to realize that you are too, and that there are space and time enough for you and me and all things. It is likely to be the person without awareness of a center like this, aware of this relationship, who is belligerent, acquisitive, selfish, one who pushes for dominance or survival. I think we can see this in some of our modern day experience. each being is the entire universe from a unique point of view, and that it's possible for all those universes to work together harmoniously. And because of sort of in the intention in the relationship, what we intend happens, and what happens is what we intend. There's no waiting, since everything is already taking place. There's no unfulfilled desire, since desire itself dissolves on the ever-present instant of fulfillment. There are no chance events, since we are the architects of creation and all things are connected through us. In the playground of reality, where the relationship between identity and holonomy is directly experienced, each of us is in the business of creating all of existence effortlessly in the wink of an instant. There's one more thing, he says. The relationship between identity and holonomy, whether we are experiencing it or not, is always going on, a silent pulse at the heart of our experience. This relationship operates, it must operate, in perfect rhythm. However, out of our joint affairs, however disrhythmic our experience during times of suffering and the approach of death, even in the midst of the most boring routine, it is always there. Perfect rhythm. So, at the deepest level, each of us is a yogi and a saint. The relationship between holonomy, do I have that? Am I saying that right? And identity pulses silently at the heart of every life. We can ignore it if we want, but it's there to serve us during times of greatest stress and joy, and sometimes to rise to consciousness when we least expect it. The moments of perfect rhythm, in fact, are probably far more prevalent than we might imagine. I think this is also consistent with what Victor talks about. I mean, just to get up, walk over there, open the door, walk outside is kind of a perfect thing. How did we do that? How did I do that? It seems real normal. No tree fell on me, house didn't fall down, hurricane didn't hit me. Every one of us, if we are willing to open our memories wide, can bring to mind one or more of these periods when everything seemed extremely easy or exactly right. Yes, flow, being in the zone. Playwright Neil Simon says, it's hard to explain when things are going well. It seems effortless, very loose. Screenwriter Alan J. Lerner says, when things are going well, the elevator arrives sooner, room service is faster, you get a taxi cab easier, your wife seems to love you more, you love the whole world more. I think your whole constitution changes. And this would be similar to, I think, the concepts that Kenny Werner talks about in his book Effortless Mastery when it comes to music and other things in life, of course. But that you just have to kind of tap into it, feel it, be it. Perfect rhythm is not exclusive, Leonard says. According to the formulation that is merged in these pages, it is always silently pulsating at the heart of each of us, available to our awareness on certain rare occasions, and I would suggest they're not that rare. Part of this is related to this concept of surrender. Surrender, give in. You know, there can be a sudden shift in consciousness upon that surrender, where there's a strange sense of completion. It's as if one is in the exact center of time. He says, episodes of perfect rhythm are kind of religious in the broad sense, but he says, I want to remove them from any narrowly focused definition of that word so that we can seek such episodes, not just in monasteries and ashrams, or even in Arcadian solitude, not just in, but also in what might seem the most unlikely places, at a board of directors meeting, for example, playing with friends, playing cards, walking down the street. This, this mastery, this merging in with the silent pulse, can take place anywhere. Then he gets into, in chapter 9, intentionality and power. And he asks, the present moment is the term we use. It's almost as if we were involved in the process of creation, instant by instant, with all that is. And that seems right. The experience of perfect rhythm, something that just happens, or is it something just happens, or is it intentional? And he argues basically it's intentional, but it's not necessarily our conscious intention. Conscious or not, intentionality is continually in the process of influencing the universe that is each of us. Every one of us is continually influencing our universe through our own intentionality. When we're willing to take personal responsibility, and I believe this has a role in it as well, responsibility for positive transformation, we become increasingly empowered in this and other aspects. Doesn't mean we shouldn't go to see the doctor if we're sick, but it's a suggestion that we acknowledge our transformative powers and begin to turn them toward the positive. He says this is easy to see in sports, and he has got some discussion about that. Intense effort becomes only effective through total surrender. I mean, that could be sports or music, as a musician. And I agree with. I've kind of felt this for some time. What is being said of the body is equally true of the body politic. In social matters, we generally accept conditions that demean human dignity, much less potential. We tolerate massive injustice, hunger, brutality, or nature as inevitable. But he says that's irresponsible to let this world languish. And if we can only take it a little bit further, there can be all this intentionality that's not for harmony, but for disharmony, which we see quite a bit in the next chapter called The Intention of the Universe. He says, it's interesting that the present moment always contains an element of genuine novelty. The universe is continually at its work of restructuring itself in a higher, more complex, more elegant level. The novelty of the new, more complex order doesn't emerge from the present in a steady stream, nor at all places at the same rate. It comes, as all things do, in rhythmic waves. There will always be times and places of scarcity and stagnation and retrogression. Still, the long-term direction is clear. The intention of the universe is evolution. The intention of the universe is entrainment. Moves out of entrainment. Entrainment. Our key choice is whether to become aware of and take responsibility for the power of our intentionality. We're getting toward the end here. Thanks for hanging on. A world of connectedness, potential, and evolution turns us toward a vivid sense of community, along with the acceptance of personal responsibility, toward a de-emphasis on competing and winning, along with a re-emphasis on participating and experiencing, from aggression toward gentleness and enjoyment, from dominance of nature to blending with nature, from an exponential growth in production and consumption to a more moderate, more ecological standard of living, along with a powerful intentionality towards social justice around the world. He says this you can call transformation. And it makes sense to me to put, this is kind of what has been driving me for some time, is putting individual intention toward collective intention to essentially make a better world. So if you're really interested in this stuff and you want to dig into it and get more out of it than I've just been able to sort of summarize and put out here for you here in these 50 minutes, this is the book again, The Silent Pulse by George Leonard. You can get it on Amazon and places. I don't think there is an audio book, so what I've just done is about as close as you can get. And I'm just doing this as fair use. I'm not trying to sell any of this. So I'm not trying to infringe anyone's copyright, but do what I hope George Leonard would be happy about, is expressing his thoughts about this, which I believe are really, really profound. And it's kind of like, you know, if you believe you can move that stone up the hill, you could move the stone up the hill. And that applies in every aspect of life, to any problem that we have, to any social issue that we have. Yes, we can. Thanks very much. Jefferson Glassie here. Namaste. Appreciate your listening. Hope you got something out of this. Let me know if you have any thoughts or comments. Thank you.